Welcome. First, in Spotlight Africa, President Vladimir Putin has pledged to deepen relations with African countries across several spheres, promising a free supply of grain to the continent to tackle food insecurity. Putin made this known today in a statement themed Russia and Africa, joining efforts for peace, progress, and a successful future. Ahead of the second Russia-Africa Summit and Russia-Africa Economic and Humanitarian Forum, the summit scheduled to hold on July 27 and July 28 in St. Petersburg, Russia, seeks to strengthen relations between Russia and Africa, outlining priority cooperation areas for the coming decades of the 21st century. Putin stated that Russia attaches great importance to the summit, with expectations of adopting a comprehensive declaration, a number of joint statements, and approval of the extension of the Russia-Africa Partnership Forum Action Plan to 2026. Meanwhile, the U.S. has announced sanctions against three top Malian officials set to be coordinating the spread of Russian private military firm Wagner in the West African country. They are Mali's defense minister, Air Force chief, and the deputy chief of staff, says U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. He says civilian deaths have tripled since Wagner forces were deployed to Mali in December of 2021, adding that many of those deaths were the result of operations conducted by the Malian armed forces alongside members of the Wagner Group. Washington and its allies have for years hit the Wagner Group and its supporters with sanctions, accusing the paramilitary group of rights abuses and spreading misinformation. In January, Washington designated Wagner as a transnational criminal organization. Last week, the UK sanctioned 13 individuals with links to Wagner in the Central African Republic, Mali, and Sudan. Force there, the Malian junta, which seized power in May 2021, has increasingly turned to Wagner. Meanwhile, Wagner is thought to have some 1,000 troops in the Sahel nation that has been the epicenter of jihadist turmoil and political unrest for years. Away from that, the main opposition group in Kenya says it is taking a break from cost of living protests. The coalition claims there have been at least 50 deaths so far, with hundreds of wounded people taken to hospitals. It accuses police of engaging in excessive force and brutality against civilians, some of whom it says were nowhere near the protest scenes. The Interior Minister has defended the police's use of force, saying they had found themselves in highly dangerous situations. The state also accuses Azimio of exaggerating the number of dead. A police oversight body says they have begun investigations into the latest reports of atrocities, but told newsmen their capacity to conduct investigations was limited as they only had 250 officers spread across the country. In a related development, Kenya's opposition leader Raila Odinga says he plans to launch a fund for families who lost their loved ones and those still in hospital receiving treatment amid nationwide demonstrations. Speaking to members of the International Press Association of East Africa today, the Azimio coalition leader added that the fund would be available for others to contribute as well. According to reports, more protests had been planned for Wednesday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. But in a statement on Twitter, Odinga has called for a different type of protest to take place instead. Meanwhile, Kenya's police have been battling protesters in the latest opposition protest against the rising cost of living and tax hikes. In another development, Ghana's central bank has increased key interest rates by 30% to curb the country's soaring inflation. This is a 0.5% increase. The hike was announced on Monday at the end of its monetary policy meeting. Now, according to reports, this makes it more expensive to borrow money and is intended to reduce consumer spending. The West African nation has been reportedly grappling with a battered economy marred by inflation currently over 42%, huge public debt, and a high rise of cost of living. We move now, still in Ghana, looking at the former Minister for Sanitation and Water Resources, Cecilia Dapa, who has been arrested by the Office of the Special Prosecutor (OSP) after the reported theft of $1 million cash from her house. According to the OSP, the former minister was placed under house arrest on Sunday, 22nd of July, on suspected corruption and corruption-related offences. Meanwhile, many Ghanaians and anti-corruption campaigners have questioned how a public servant can have so much money stashed in their home amid an economic crisis in Ghana. Recall that Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo accepted her resignation on Saturday following a public outcry. Now, according to reports, the money was uncovered after two of her domestic staff were accused of stealing $1 million in cash, along with £300,000 and several million Ghana cedis, as well as some personal items. In a separate development, Algeria says 15 people have been killed in wildfires during a continuous severe heat wave. The deaths happened in the mountainous Baija and Boria regions, where more than 7,000 firefighters are battling blazes. Meanwhile, 1,500 people have been evacuated. Algeria's meteorological office has warned that temperatures of more than 48 degrees Celsius are likely to continue until the end of the month in the north of the country. The news follows weeks of high temperatures across North Africa, reaching 50 degrees Celsius in some areas. Since the heat wave began, electricity consumption in Algeria is reported to have reached the highest level in the country's history. Capital Dakar. Reports say rescue workers were still looking for more bodies after the pirogue overturned overnight from Sunday to Monday. Activity has increased in recent weeks along the Atlantic Sea route from Northwest Africa, used by migrants to try to reach Europe via Spain's Canary Islands. At least 14 people died in mid-July when a pirogue capsized off Senegal's Saint Louis near the border with Mauritania. Away from that, Chad, I beg your pardon, has started preparations for the planned referendum due to take place on the 17th of December on a new constitution aimed at returning it to civilian rule. Today, the government launched an initiative to revise and update the list of the electoral register from the 2021 biometric file. A team comprising of the Minister of Territorial Administration, who is also chairman of the National Committee in charge of organizing the referendum, and other government officials were in the Moyen Chari region for the launch. Meanwhile, the new electoral register is expected to be published on the 12th of November to pave the way for campaign activities. New malaria vaccine gets green light in Burkina Faso. Stay tuned for details of this and more after this timeout.
Business exists only to meet the needs of the people, but there's an extra advantage if your product and services are pitched on a platform that gives you the added advantage over your competitors. For your desired return on investment and so much more, advertise on Spectrum Television, on StarTime's DTH Channel 421 and on free-to-air with a frequency of 12733. Spectrum Television, broadening your horizon.
Welcome back. This is still Spotlight Africa, brought to you by Spectrum Television and Planet Radio. To move further in today's news, Human Rights Watch HRW has accused Mali's armed forces and foreign fighters thought to be from Russia's Wagner group of widespread abuses, including executing dozens of civilians and torturing detainees. It said the atrocities were committed over the last 7 months in response to the presence of Islamist armed groups in the central Mopti and Sego regions. Eyewitnesses said in March they saw helicopters flying low, shooting at villagers. According to reports in February, they found the bodies of 8 men who had just been detained. Meanwhile, Mali's foreign minister said he was not aware of the abuses and denied that any foreign forces were involved in operations with the military. We move now to Somalia, where a military source has told newsmen that 25 soldiers were killed when a man rigged himself with explosives and detonated himself among soldiers who were queuing up at the Jel Said College camp. The military has not made any official comment on the incident. 48 others were said to have been injured and taken to hospitals in Mogadishu. Reports say the man who blew himself up was wearing a military uniform and entered the camp with a false identity. The military source, who did not want to be named, told newsmen. Meanwhile, Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab said one of its fighters had carried out the bombing, saying 73 soldiers had been killed and 124 injured. Back home on the home front, Nigeria, a court in London has ordered the lawyer of a former Nigerian governor to pay around $36 million for helping him hide funds. Bradresh Gohil was convicted in 2010 of money laundering linked to his role in helping the former governor of oil-rich Delta State, James Ibori, to hide the proceeds from criminal activities. Both men have already served prison sentences in the UK for money laundering. On Friday, Ibori, who now lives back in Nigeria, was ordered to hand over $130 million of stolen money. The London court said both men would face further prison sentences if they failed to pay. Meanwhile, Nigeria's suspended bank chief has appeared in court more than a month after he was arrested by the country's secret police. Godwin Emefiele was charged with illegally owning a shotgun and ammunition at Tuesday's appearance in Lagos, where he arrived clutching a huge Bible. He denied the allegations. The 61-year-old has been granted bail by Justice Nicholas Owiebo, who rejected the government's claim that Emefiele was a flight risk. It marks a spectacular fall for a man that only recently flirted with the idea of becoming Nigeria's president. He was not successful in getting the nomination of the ruling institution's history. Over now to the war in Sudan. The World Health Organization (WHO) is warning of a deepening humanitarian crisis in Sudan, where more than 2/3 of the country's hospitals are out of service. There are increasing reports of attacks on healthcare facilities and staff. It says for the hundreds of thousands who have fled the violence and crossed borders, life remains precarious. According to the WHO, disease outbreaks, including malaria, and of basic public health services. It also says there are increasing reports of sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls. Meanwhile, in a separate development, a 4-story building that collapsed in Cameroon, killing 34 people, had been built without a permit, says the House. Reporters, an investigation has been launched and rescue efforts will continue in recent times. Lastly, on Spotlight, young children offering hope that millions of lives can be saved. The R21 vaccine has already been approved. Gorkago says this new vaccine will be an extremely important tool in the, according to reports, the R21 vaccine a couple of US dollars. This is also brought to you by Planet Radio, and so check us out on planetradio.ng. My name is Uyai, and I can thank you for being a part of this. Enjoy the rest of your day.